There's a secret that Zen masters discovered over 1,000 years ago that can transform every conversation you have for the rest of your life. And I'm about to share it with you in the next 60 minutes. But first, let me tell you about the 3 deadliest mistakes 90% of people make when they speak. Mistakes that destroy relationships, create endless conflict, and leave you feeling exhausted from conversations that should bring you closer to the people you love. The first mistake? Saying what you think people want to hear instead of what you actually mean. You've done this. We all have. That polite, "I'm fine" when you're falling apart inside. That fake smile when someone hurts your feelings. That agreement when every fiber of your being wants to say no. You think you're being kind, but you're actually creating a wall between your authentic self and genuine connection. The second mistake is even more dangerous. It's using your words as weapons when you feel threatened, the sharp tone when you're stressed, the cutting remark when someone disagrees with you, the silent treatment when you're hurt. In those moments, your speech becomes a tool for control instead of connection, and it pushes away the very people you're trying to reach. But the third mistake might surprise you. It's staying silent when your voice could heal, not speaking up when someone needs encouragement, not sharing your truth when it could set someone free, not saying "I love you" or "I'm sorry" or "I see you" when those words could change everything. Here's what those ancient Zen masters understood that changes everything. Your words don't just describe your reality, they create it. Every time you speak from fear, you create more fear. Every time you speak from love, you create more love. Every time you speak from peace, you literally plant seeds of peace in the world. Tonight, through 3 sacred stories from the Zen tradition, you're going to discover how to speak from that place of peace, no matter how challenging the conversation. And by the end of this hour, you'll never approach communication the same way again. Let's begin with a young monk who learned that speaking your truth doesn't make you vulnerable. It makes you free. In the misty peaks of ancient China, where clouds danced between towering pine trees and mountain streams carved paths through moss-covered stones, there stood a monastery known throughout the land for something extraordinary. This wasn't a place famous for golden statues or elaborate ceremonies. It was renowned for the way its monks spoke to each other, with such honesty and compassion that visitors would leave transformed, not by what they heard, but by how they felt heard. Among these monks lived a young man named Wei Ming, and he carried a secret that was slowly destroying him from the inside. Wei Ming had mastered the art of saying exactly what people wanted to hear. In his village below the mountain, he'd been the peacekeeper, the diplomat, the one everyone trusted to smooth over conflicts with just the right words. But here's what no one knew. Wei Ming had completely lost touch with his own voice. Every morning, the monks would gather for what they called the practice of true speech. It wasn't meditation or chanting. It was something far more terrifying. Honest conversation. They would sit in a circle and share their real struggles, their actual thoughts, their authentic experiences of trying to live a spiritual life. And every morning, Wei Ming would craft beautiful, spiritually appropriate responses that revealed absolutely nothing about what was actually happening in his heart. Now, in Zen Buddhism, there's a teaching that says the ego creates what masters call masks of perfection. These are the false faces we show the world, hoping to earn approval and avoid rejection. But here's the devastating truth about these masks. They don't protect us. They imprison us. They cut us off from genuine connection with others and from our own Buddha nature, that inherent wisdom and compassion that exists within every human being. Wei Ming had been wearing his mask for so long, he'd forgotten there was a face underneath. One autumn evening, as golden leaves danced outside the meditation hall windows like prayers made visible, something happened that would shatter Wei Ming's carefully constructed spiritual persona forever. Master Chen, an elderly monk who had been practicing for over 50 years, stood before the assembled community, with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The silence in the hall was profound, filled with the kind of presence that emerges when human beings sense they're about to witness something sacred. And then, Master Chen spoke words that would echo in Wei Ming's heart for the rest of his life. "Brothers," he began, his voice trembling not with weakness but with the immense courage it takes to speak absolute truth. "I must confess something that has been eating at my soul like a hungry ghost. For 3 years, I have been pretending to experience the deep peace that you all speak of in meditation. I sit in perfect posture, I breathe correctly, I follow all the techniques our ancestors taught us, but inside, my mind is like a wild monkey, jumping from branch to branch of worry, doubt, and restless thoughts that never seem to end." The admission hung in the air like incense, sacred and transformative. Wei Ming felt something crack open in his chest as Master Chen continued. "I have been afraid to speak this truth because I feared you would lose respect for me, that you would doubt my years of practice, that I would be seen as a failure rather than a teacher. But tonight, I realize that my silence has been the real failure. How can I guide others to freedom if I am not free myself? How can I teach about the liberation that comes from truth if I am trapped in the prison of my own pretense?" What happened next was unlike anything Wei Ming had ever witnessed. Instead of judgment or disappointment, the community responded with something beautiful, a collective exhale of recognition and relief. One by one, other monks began sharing their own hidden struggles, their real experiences, their authentic spiritual journeys, with all the messiness and confusion that true seeking involves. Brother Liu spoke of his ongoing battle with pride during philosophical debates. Brother Wang admitted to feeling jealous when younger monks seemed to progress faster in their practice. Another confessed to sometimes eating extra portions during meals, breaking their vows of simplicity, because food had become his way of dealing with loneliness. But these confessions weren't bitter or self-condemning. They were spoken with what the Zen tradition calls gentle honesty. Truth offered with the same care one might use to tend a garden, not to destroy, but to nurture growth. When the circle of sharing reached Wei Ming, his heart began to race like a startled deer. The familiar urge to offer something pleasant and spiritually appropriate rose in his throat like morning mist. But something else rose too. A deep longing to lay down the exhausting burden of constant performance, to be known rather than admired, to speak from his heart rather than his reputation. The silence stretched like the space between lightning and thunder, full of infinite potential. Finally, Wei Ming spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of absolute sincerity. "I don't know who I am when I'm not trying to impress someone," he said, the words tumbling out like water, finally finding its natural course. I've spent so many years crafting wise responses and spiritual insights that I've completely lost touch with my actual experience. Right now, in this moment, I feel frightened and small and completely unsure of everything I thought I knew about Buddhist practice. I don't even know if what I just said is true, because I'm not sure I remember how to recognize my own truth anymore. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, like the pause between a question and its perfect answer. Master Wu, the monastery's abbot, who had been listening with the deep attention that comes from decades of practice, spoke gently into the quiet space. "Wei Ming," he said, "in all your months of beautiful words and careful insights, tonight you have spoken your first teaching. Do you know what you have just demonstrated?" Wei Ming shook his head, still trembling from the vulnerability of his confession. "You have shown us the courage to be ordinary," Master Wu continued. "In Zen, we have a saying, the perfect way is without difficulty, except that it avoids picking and choosing. You have spent your time here picking and choosing which parts of yourself to reveal, trying to choose only the spiritual, the wise, the admirable parts. But the Buddha nature that you seek is not found in your best moments. It is found in your willingness to embrace your whole truth, including the parts that feel unspiritual." This teaching points to one of the most profound insights of Zen Buddhism, that our authentic self, including our doubts and struggles, is not something to be overcome, but something to be embraced with compassion. The tradition teaches that when we stop trying to be a perfect Buddhist and start being an honest human being, we discover that our humanity itself is sacred. In the days that followed, Wei Ming began what he privately called his practice of choiceless awareness, a teaching from the Zen masters about observing what is actually happening in his mind and heart without immediately trying to fix or improve it. When Master Wu asked how his meditation was progressing, instead of offering polished reflections, Wei Ming shared his actual experience. "Yesterday, during sitting meditation, I spent the entire session planning what I would say during today's Dharma discussion," he admitted. "I noticed myself trying to craft insights that would sound profound rather than simply observing my breath or being present with what was actually arising." Master Wu's response surprised him completely. "Excellent. You are beginning to see the mind's habitual patterns. This seeing, this honest noticing, is itself enlightenment. Not the dramatic enlightenment of stories and legends, but the gentle awakening that comes from meeting reality exactly as it is, not as we think it should be." This is a crucial teaching in Zen practice. That awakening doesn't require us to have perfect experiences, but rather to see our imperfect experiences with perfect honesty. The tradition speaks of ordinary mind as the way, not an elevated spiritual state, but the willingness to be present with whatever is actually occurring in our consciousness, moment by moment. As weeks passed, something remarkable began to happen. Wei Ming discovered that when he stopped using his words to create a false image of spiritual advancement, space opened for genuine wisdom to emerge. During community discussions about the Dharma, insights would arise naturally from his authentic engagement with the teachings rather than from his desire to appear knowledgeable. One morning, while working in the monastery garden alongside Brother Liu, a young visiting student approached them with a question that had been troubling his heart. "Masters," the student said, bowing respectfully, I have been practicing meditation for 2 years, but I still have many selfish thoughts during sitting. When will my mind become pure, like the minds of enlightened beings?" Brother Liu began to offer a traditional response about patience and continued practice, but Wei Ming found himself speaking from a completely different place. Not from his learned knowledge or spiritual training, but from the simple honesty he'd been cultivating. "Friend," he said, pausing in his weeding to look directly at the student with eyes that held no pretense. "What if I told you that my mind right now is filled with thoughts about whether I'm pulling these weeds correctly, whether Brother Liu approves of my work, and whether my back will ache if I stay bent over much longer? The difference isn't that enlightened people don't have ordinary thoughts. It's that they don't pretend these thoughts aren't there." The student's face transformed with recognition and relief. "You mean I don't have to wait until my thoughts are pure to be a real practitioner?" "You don't have to wait for anything," Wei Ming replied, surprised by the naturalness of his response. "Your thoughts, exactly as they are right now, are the perfect place to practice compassion and awareness. The Buddha nature you're seeking isn't hiding behind your thoughts. It's the awareness that notices your thoughts without judgment, that can be present with whatever arises without needing it to be different." Later, Master Wu approached Wei Ming in the garden where he was still working. "Your words this morning," the teacher said, "they came from Buddha mind. Did you notice the difference?" Wei Ming paused in his gardening, considering the question with the same careful attention he now brought to everything. He had noticed something different, a feeling of the words arising naturally, without effort or calculation, like water finding its own level. "It felt like the truth was speaking itself," he said simply. "Yes," smiled Master Wu. "This is what our ancestors called speaking from emptiness. Not empty of content, but empty of ego. When we stop trying to control how others see us, wisdom can flow through us as naturally as a river flows toward the sea. Your honest confusion has become a clearer teaching than all your previous spiritual insights combined." This points to a beautiful paradox in Zen teaching, that our willingness to appear unwise often allows true wisdom to emerge, while our efforts to appear wise often block wisdom completely. The tradition speaks of beginner's mind, the open, humble awareness that doesn't claim to know but remains curious and present to what is. Months later, during the monastery's annual visit from Master Jin, a renowned teacher from the capital whose approval was considered a great honor, Wei Ming faced his ultimate test. When selected to demonstrate his understanding through formal Dharma dialogue with the visiting master, every old instinct screamed at him to prepare impressive responses and profound questions. But as he sat in meditation the night before the dialogue, feeling the familiar tension returning to his shoulders and the old anxiety building in his chest, Wei Ming made a choice that went against every pattern he'd developed over years of seeking approval. Instead of crafting the perfect spiritual persona for Master Jin, he decided to meet the renowned teacher with the same honest presence he'd been cultivating in his daily practice. When the time came for dialogue, Wei Ming bowed respectfully to Master Jin and spoke from his heart rather than his preparation. "Honored teacher," he said, "I was chosen to demonstrate my understanding of the Dharma, but I must tell you honestly that I understand very little. I know how to sit quietly and notice my breath without getting completely lost in thought. I know how to work in the garden with some degree of presence. I know how to speak truthfully with my brothers about my struggles and small insights. But if you ask me about the deepest mysteries of existence, I can only say that they remain mysterious to me, and somehow that mystery feels more sacred than any explanation I could offer. Master Jin studied Wei Ming with eyes that seemed to see everything hidden and everything revealed. Then, unexpectedly, the great teacher began to laugh. Not mockery, but the delighted laughter of recognition, like finding a rare flower growing in an unexpected place. "Finally," Master Jin said, his eyes twinkling with genuine joy, "someone who knows the difference between knowing about the way and walking the way. Tell me, young monk, when you sit in meditation and notice your breath, who is doing the noticing?" "I don't know," Wei Ming replied simply, without hesitation or embarrassment. "When you work in the garden without getting lost in thought, what is it that remains aware even when thoughts arise?" "I don't know." "When you speak truthfully with your brothers, where do these true words come from?" "I don't know." Master Jin clapped his hands together with pure delight. "Excellent. You have just given 3 perfect Dharma answers. The ancient masters said that all wisdom begins with, 'I don't know,' not the ignorance that refuses to learn, but the humility that remains open to reality as it actually is, rather than as we think it should be." This exchange illustrates a fundamental teaching in Zen Buddhism, that intellectual understanding, while useful, can become a barrier to direct experience if we cling to it too tightly. The tradition values what is called "don't know mind," the willingness to meet each moment fresh, without the burden of preconceived ideas about how enlightenment should look or feel. Years later, when Wei Ming had become a teacher himself, students would often ask him about the secret to authentic Dharma dialogue. His answer remained consistent with the lesson he'd learned that transformative evening with Master Jin. "First," he would say, "stop trying to sound like a Buddhist. The Dharma isn't interested in Buddhist language. It's interested in truth. Speak from your actual experience, not from what you think your experience should be. When you encounter something you don't understand, say, 'I don't know,' with the same confidence you would say, 'I know.' Both are equally valuable on the path to understanding. Second, remember that every conversation is a chance to practice presence. Are you speaking to impress or to connect? Are you listening to respond or to understand? The person in front of you is not an audience for your spiritual performance. They are a fellow seeker deserving of your most honest attention. And finally, trust that your ordinary human experience, met with awareness and compassion, is already sacred. You don't need to become someone else to walk the Dharma path. You need to become more deeply who you already are, including the parts of yourself that feel unspiritual, confused, or imperfect. These parts are not obstacles to awakening. They are the very ground in which awakening grows. As our first story draws to a gentle close, take a moment to breathe with this question that Wei Ming carried with him for the rest of his life. What would it feel like to speak your truth, not to prove your wisdom, but to honor the mystery of existence that flows through all beings? What might open in your relationships if your words came from presence rather than performance? Let this question rest quietly in your heart, because our next story will show us how even the most powerful people in the world can be transformed when they encounter someone who speaks from this place of authentic presence. We'll journey to an ancient imperial court where a humble Zen master taught an emperor that true strength isn't found in commanding others, but in understanding the nature of one's own mind. In the imperial capital of ancient Japan, where cherry blossoms fell like snow onto marble courtyards, and the weight of tradition pressed down like morning mist, there ruled an emperor whose very voice could silence a room of 1,000 people. Emperor Kamu was not a cruel man, but he was a man who had learned that power meant never showing weakness, never admitting uncertainty, and never allowing others to see the human heart that beat beneath his golden robes. Every morning, courtiers would gather in the vast throne room, bowing so low their foreheads touched the polished floor, waiting for words that could elevate them to glory or cast them into exile. And every morning, Emperor Kamu would speak with the absolute authority that his position demanded, making decisions that affected millions of lives, settling disputes with swift judgment, commanding respect through the sheer force of his imperial presence. But here's what none of those courtiers knew. Inside that magnificent throne room, behind those confident pronouncements, the emperor felt utterly alone. You see, Emperor Kamu had discovered something that haunts every person who holds great power. When people fear your displeasure, they stop telling you the truth. When your words can change someone's destiny, conversations become performances rather than connections. When everyone agrees with you because they have to, you begin to lose touch with reality itself. And slowly, gradually, the emperor had begun to suspect that his authority was built not on wisdom or strength, but on the collective fear of everyone around him. One spring morning, as the capital buzzed with preparations for the Cherry Blossom Festival, a message arrived that would change everything. A Zen master named Aisai, recently returned from studying in China, had requested an audience with the emperor. Not to seek favor or position, the message explained, but simply to share teachings about what he called the way of gentle strength. Now, Emperor Kamu had met many religious teachers over the years. They usually came bearing elaborate gifts, speaking in flowery language designed to flatter imperial ego, seeking land for temples or gold for statues. But something about this Master Aisai's message was different. It contained no requests, no flattery, no promises of divine favor. Just a simple invitation to explore what true strength might actually mean. Intrigued, despite himself, the emperor agreed to the meeting. But he decided to test this supposed master first, to see if this gentle strength could withstand the full weight of imperial authority. When Master Aisai arrived at the palace, the emperor had arranged for maximum intimidation. The throne room was filled with hundreds of courtiers in their most elaborate robes. Incense burned in golden braziers. Musicians played haunting melodies that seemed to echo from the very walls. And at the center of it all sat Emperor Kamu on his chrysanthemum throne, elevated high above the assembled crowd, surrounded by symbols of power that had intimidated kings and generals for centuries. Master Aisai entered, wearing simple brown robes that looked like they had been mended many times. He carried no gifts, no ceremonial items, nothing but a worn wooden staff and an expression of such profound calm that it seemed to create its own atmosphere of peace. As he walked the length of that vast throne room, something extraordinary happened. Instead of the usual nervous energy that filled the space when people approached the emperor, a deep stillness settled over the entire assembly. When Master Aisai reached the appropriate distance from the throne, he did something that no one had ever done in that room. He bowed respectfully, but not with the deep, fearful prostration that protocol demanded. Instead, he offered the bow of one human being, acknowledging another. Equal in dignity, different only in circumstances. And when he straightened, his eyes met the emperor's directly, without challenge but also without submission. Emperor Camus felt something shift inside his chest. For the first time in years, someone was looking at him, not as an emperor to be feared or flattered, but as a human being to be seen. The feeling was so unfamiliar that, for a moment, he forgot the intimidating speech he had prepared. "Master Aisai," the emperor said, his voice carrying across the silent throne room, "I have heard that you teach something called gentle strength. But I rule an empire through decisive authority. I command armies through unwavering resolve. What could gentleness possibly teach someone in my position?" Master Aisai smiled, not the nervous smile of someone trying to please authority, but the natural expression of someone who had found something worth sharing. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying easily through the vast space without strain or effort, "may I tell you what I learned about strength during my years in the mountains of China?" The emperor nodded, curious despite himself. "I once watched a terrible storm strike the mountain where I was studying," Master Aisai continued. "The winds were so fierce they could have knocked a man off his feet. I watched as the great oak trees, magnificent and strong, fought against the storm with all their power. They stood rigid, refusing to bend, determined to show their strength by resisting the wind. And one by one, these mighty oaks were snapped in half, or torn from the ground by their roots." The throne room remained absolutely silent as Master Aisai continued. "But there was a bamboo grove near my meditation hut, and these slender plants did something different. When the storm winds struck them, they bent so deeply they almost touched the ground. They offered no resistance, no fight, no stubborn refusal to yield. And when the storm passed, every single bamboo stood upright again, unbroken, dancing gently in the peaceful breeze." Emperor Camus found himself leaning forward on his throne. "And what does this have to do with ruling an empire?" "Your Majesty," Master Aisai replied, "in Zen Buddhism, we teach that there are two kinds of strength. There is the strength that breaks, rigid, hard, always pushing against what it encounters. And there is the strength that bends, flexible, responsive, able to meet any situation with exactly the energy it requires. The first kind of strength appears powerful but becomes brittle over time. The second kind appears soft but proves unbreakable when truly tested." This teaching points to one of the most profound insights in Zen philosophy, the concept of wu wei, or effortless action. It suggests that true power comes not from forcing our will upon the world, but from understanding the natural flow of situations and responding with precise appropriateness, rather than reflexive dominance. The emperor sat in silence for a long moment, feeling something stirring in his consciousness that he hadn't experienced in years. Finally, he spoke, but his voice had lost some of its imperial commanding tone. "Master, are you suggesting that I should be weak, that I should let others walk over me, that I should abandon the authority necessary to maintain order in my realm. Master Aisai's eyes sparkled with understanding. "Your Majesty, may I ask you a question that might sound strange?" The emperor nodded. "When you speak with absolute authority, demanding immediate obedience, do people tell you what they really think?" The question hit like lightning striking clear sky. Emperor Camus realized that for years, perhaps decades, he had been surrounded by people who told him only what they thought he wanted to hear. His advisors agreed with his decisions even when those decisions were clearly flawed. His generals supported his strategies even when they privately believed different approaches might save more lives. His own family spoke to him with such careful deference that he couldn't remember the last time someone had simply asked him how he was feeling. "No," the emperor admitted quietly, "they do not." "And when people cannot tell you their truth," Master Aisai continued gently, "how can you make decisions based on reality rather than the illusions that fear creates? How can you understand the real needs of your people if they cannot express those needs honestly? How can you grow in wisdom if you are surrounded only by echoes of your own assumptions?" The emperor felt something cracking open inside his chest, not breaking, but opening, like ice beginning to melt in spring sunlight. For the first time in his adult life, he was face to face with the possibility that his way of wielding power might actually be making him less powerful, not more. "Master Aisai," he said, and his courtiers were shocked to hear genuine curiosity in his voice, rather than imperial pronouncement. "How does one lead with this? He speak of, gentle strength you speak of." "Your Majesty," the master replied, "in Zen practice, we learn that the most powerful presence comes from inner stillness rather than outer force. When a leader speaks from calm awareness instead of reactive emotion, people feel safe to share their real thoughts. When decisions arise from careful listening rather than quick judgment, they tend to address root causes instead of surface symptoms. And when authority is exercised with compassion rather than dominance, it actually becomes more effective because people choose to follow rather than being forced to comply. This touches on a fundamental principle in Zen leadership, that true authority comes from what the tradition calls Buddha mind, a state of consciousness that is simultaneously powerful and peaceful, decisive and compassionate. It suggests that the most effective leaders are those who have learned to act from wisdom rather than ego, from presence rather than reactivity. Over the following weeks, something unprecedented began happening in the imperial court. Emperor Camus started experimenting with Master Aisai's teachings, not by abandoning his authority, but by wielding it differently. Instead of announcing decisions immediately, he began asking questions first. Instead of speaking with absolute certainty about complex issues, he acknowledged what he didn't know and sought input from people with relevant experience. The first time he said, "I'm not certain about this approach. What do you think?" to his council of advisors. The silence that followed was so profound, you could have heard a cherry blossom fall. The advisors looked at each other in confusion and something approaching terror. Was this a test? Was the emperor trying to trick them into contradicting imperial wisdom? But gradually, tentatively, one elderly advisor who had served 3 emperors began to speak his actual thoughts about the economic policies they had been discussing. What followed was the most productive policy discussion the court had experienced in decades. Ideas flowed freely, problems were identified honestly, and solutions emerged from collective wisdom rather than single-minded authority. The emperor found himself learning things about his own empire that had been hidden from him for years, behind the wall of fearful agreement that his old style of leadership had created. But the real test of gentle strength came during a crisis that threatened to tear the empire apart. A regional governor had been accused of corruption, and two powerful factions at court were demanding opposite responses. One group insisted the governor should be publicly executed as an example to others. The other argued he should be quietly pardoned to avoid political instability. Both sides presented their arguments with passionate intensity, and the entire court waited to see which faction the emperor would favor with his decisive judgment. Under his old approach, Emperor Kamu would have made a swift decision, chosen a side, and ended the debate through imperial decree. But Master Aizai's teachings had planted a different possibility in his consciousness. Instead of announcing a judgment, the emperor did something that shocked everyone present. He admitted uncertainty. "This is a complex situation with serious consequences no matter what decision I make," he said. "I need to understand more before choosing a path that serves justice and the welfare of our people. I want to hear from the governor himself, from the people affected by his alleged actions, and from advisors who have no political stake in the outcome." The process that followed took weeks rather than minutes. The emperor listened to testimony from dozens of people. He asked probing questions. He meditated on the principles of justice that should guide his decision. And when he finally announced his judgment, a middle path that involved restitution to those harmed, removal from office, but not execution. It was received not as arbitrary imperial will, but as a carefully considered response to a complex moral situation. More importantly, both factions felt heard, even those who disagreed with aspects of the final decision. Instead of creating winners and losers, the emperor's approach had created a sense that justice had been pursued thoughtfully and compassionately. Master Aizai, who had remained at court as an advisor during this period, approached the emperor after the judgment was announced. "Your Majesty," he said with a smile, "do you notice the difference between commanding respect and earning it?" The emperor paused, reflecting on the question with the same careful attention he now brought to all important matters. "Yes," he said slowly. "When I commanded respect through force and authority, people obeyed me, but they also feared me. And fear creates distance, secrets, resentment. But when I earn respect through wisdom and fairness, people choose to follow me because they trust my judgment, not because they have to." "And which kind of respect creates more actual power?" Master Aizai asked. "The kind that is freely given," the emperor replied without hesitation, "because it comes from people's hearts rather than their fears. And what comes from the heart is stronger and more lasting than what comes from compulsion." This insight represents a crucial teaching in Zen philosophy about the nature of true influence. The tradition teaches that force creates resistance, while wisdom creates willing cooperation. It suggests that the most effective leaders are those who inspire rather than intimidate, who create safety for truth-telling rather than punishment for disagreement. Years later, historians would write about the transformation of Emperor Kamu's reign noting how the later years were marked by unprecedented peace, prosperity, and loyalty throughout the empire. But what those histories could never capture was the quiet revolution that had taken place in the emperor's own heart. The discovery that true strength comes not from the ability to dominate others, but from the wisdom to understand oneself. On his deathbed, surrounded by courtiers who had become genuine friends rather than fearful subjects, Emperor Kamu called for Master Aisai one final time. "Master," he whispered, "what was the most important thing you taught me?" Master Aisai smiled and spoke the words that would be carved into the emperor's memorial stone. That the bamboo which bends in the storm lasts longer than the oak which refuses to yield. And that a leader who listens with an open heart serves his people better than one who speaks with a closed mind. As our second story draws to a close, let this question settle into your consciousness like morning mist on a quiet lake. In your own life, where do you try to control through force what might respond better to gentle strength? What would change in your relationships if you spoke less from the need to be right and more from the desire to understand? Hold this reflection gently, because our final story will show us the most profound strength of all, the power that emerges when we learn to listen so deeply that silence itself becomes a teacher. We're about to meet a master who discovered that sometimes the most transformative conversations happen without a single word being spoken. In the rolling hills of rural Japan, where morning mist clung to ancient cedar trees like prayers made visible, there stood a small temple known throughout the region, not for its golden statues or elaborate ceremonies, but for something far more extraordinary. This was the home of Master Dogen, a Zen teacher whose reputation for profound wisdom had spread across the land, though he was famous for speaking fewer words in a month than most teachers spoke in a single day. Master Dogen understood something that had taken him decades of practice to discover: that in a world drowning in endless chatter, the deepest teachings often emerged not from what was said, but from the sacred space between words. His students would travel hundreds of miles to sit with him, expecting elaborate Dharma talks and profound philosophical discussions. Instead, they would find themselves sitting in gardens, walking mountain paths, or simply sharing tea in comfortable silence that somehow contained more wisdom than all the sutras they had memorized. One autumn morning, as golden leaves performed their ancient dance toward the earth, a renowned scholar named Professor Tanaka arrived at the temple gates. He came bearing letters of introduction from influential monasteries, carrying scrolls of his own philosophical writings, and expecting the kind of intellectual discourse that had made him famous in academic circles throughout the empire. Professor Tanaka had studied Buddhism for 30 years, written commentaries on the most complex texts, and debated the finest theological minds of his generation. But despite all his knowledge, something essential remained missing from his understanding: a direct experience of the peace that all his studies promised, but never seemed to deliver. When Professor Tanaka was ushered into Master Dogen's presence, he found the teacher sitting quietly in a simple room overlooking a garden where chrysanthemums bloomed in defiant beauty against the approaching winter. The scholar bowed respectfully and began the elaborate formal introduction he had prepared, listing his credentials, his publications, and his earnest desire to engage in deep Dharma dialogue with such an esteemed master. Master Dogen listened with the kind of attention that made you feel like the most important person in the world, nodding occasionally, his eyes reflecting a depth of presence that Professor Tanaka had never encountered before. When the scholar finished his introduction, expecting some response that would indicate the level of discourse they might pursue together, Master Dogen simply smiled and said 6 words that would change everything. "Would you like to sit with me?" Professor Tanaka blinked in confusion. "Certainly, Master, but I was hoping we might discuss the deeper implications of Buddha nature as revealed in the Lotus Sutra, or perhaps explore the relationship between emptiness and form as understood in the Madhyamika school of thought." The words tumbled out like water rushing down a mountainside, filled with enthusiasm and intellectual hunger. Master Dogen's smile deepened, but he said nothing more. Instead, he gestured to a cushion beside him and simply returned his gaze to the garden, where a light breeze was stirring the chrysanthemums into gentle motion. After a moment's hesitation, Professor Tanaka sat down, his mind racing with questions about when the real teaching would begin. Now, in Zen Buddhism, there's a profound teaching about what masters call noble silence. Not the silence of emptiness or avoidance, but the silence that is so full of presence, it becomes its own form of communication. This tradition recognizes that some truths are too subtle for words, some wisdom too immediate for concepts, and some forms of understanding can only be transmitted through the direct sharing of consciousness in stillness. Minutes passed, then an hour. Professor Tanaka sat beside Master Dogen, waiting for something to happen, for some teaching to begin, for some sign that his long journey and scholarly preparation would be acknowledged. His mind, accustomed to constant activity and intellectual stimulation, began to generate increasingly urgent thoughts. Surely the Master will speak soon. Perhaps this silence is a test of my patience. Maybe I should ask another question to demonstrate my seriousness. Or perhaps I should share some of my own insights to show that I'm worthy of deeper teachings. But Master Dogen simply sat, breathing naturally, occasionally watching a bird land among the flowers, or observing how shadows moved across the garden as the sun traced its ancient path across the sky. His presence was so complete, so effortlessly peaceful, that gradually something began to shift in the space around them. The quality of silence deepened, became less empty and more full, less waiting and more arriving. As the second hour passed, Professor Tanaka found his mental commentary beginning to quiet despite himself. The urgent need to be doing something, learning something, achieving something, spiritual slowly gave way to a different kind of awareness. A simple noticing of what was actually present in this moment. The warmth of sunlight through the window, the distant sound of temple bells, the subtle fragrance of incense mixed with autumn air. And underneath it all, a quality of peace that seemed to emanate not from anything being said or done, but from the profound completeness of just being exactly where they were. By the third hour, something extraordinary had happened. Professor Tanaka's scholarly mind, which had been churning like a mill wheel for 3 decades, had grown still, not through effort or technique, but through the simple contagion of Master Dogen's presence. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, the professor was experiencing what all his studies had been pointing toward, the direct taste of the peace that underlies all thinking, the awareness that exists before concepts arise, the Buddha nature that no amount of intellectual understanding can capture, but that reveals itself naturally when the mind stops grasping for it. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the garden, Master Dogen finally spoke, his voice so soft it seemed to emerge from the silence itself, rather than breaking it. "Professor," he said, "what have you learned this afternoon?" Professor Tanaka opened his mouth to respond with the kind of analytical summary that had always been his strength, but found that words felt suddenly clumsy, inadequate to express what he had experienced. I'm not sure I can put it into words, Master. For the first time in my life, I think I understand the difference between knowing about peace and actually experiencing it. All my studies taught me concepts about enlightenment, but sitting here with you, I've had a taste of what those concepts were trying to point toward. Master Dogen nodded with the gentle satisfaction of a gardener watching seeds finally sprout. The ancient masters taught that the Dharma is not found in books or lectures or debates, he said quietly. It is found in the living moment, in the direct experience of consciousness, meeting reality without the filter of constant mental commentary. Sometimes, the most profound teachings happen when we stop trying to teach and simply share presence. This points to one of the deepest insights in Zen practice, that wisdom is not information to be transmitted, but a state of being to be shared. The tradition speaks of mind-to-mind transmission, suggesting that the most essential teachings pass between teacher and student, not through words, but through the direct communication of awakened consciousness. Professor Tanaka sat in wonder, feeling like someone who had spent years studying maps of a distant country, only to suddenly find himself standing on its shores. "Master," he said hesitantly, "may I ask why you chose to teach me through silence rather than discussion?" Master Dogen's eyes twinkled with gentle humor. "Professor, when someone comes to me, carrying 30 years of concepts about water, what they need is not more descriptions of wetness. They need to jump in the river. Your mind was so full of ideas about enlightenment that there was no room for the actual experience. Sometimes we must empty the cup before we can fill it with tea. But surely words have their place in spiritual teaching?" Professor Tanaka asked, his scholarly instinct still seeking understanding. "Of course," Master Dogen replied. "Words are like fingers pointing at the moon. They can direct our attention toward truth. But some people become so fascinated by the fingers that they never look up to see what they're pointing at. The silence we shared this afternoon allowed you to look directly at the moon of your own Buddha nature without the distraction of conceptual fingers. This teaching illustrates a fundamental principle in Zen education, that intellectual understanding, while valuable, can become an obstacle if it substitutes for direct experience. The tradition emphasizes what is called beginner's mind, the willingness to set aside what we think we know in order to encounter reality fresh, without preconceptions. Over the following days, Professor Tanaka continued to sit with Master Dogen and gradually learned to distinguish between different qualities of silence. There was the restless silence of waiting for something to happen, the heavy silence of suppressed thoughts and emotions, the dead silence of boredom or mental dullness. But there was also what Master Dogen called living silence, the alive, aware stillness that is completely present and responsive to whatever arises. This living silence, Master Dogen explained during one of their rare verbal exchanges, is not the absence of communication. It is communication at its most refined level. When two people share this quality of presence, they are in constant dialogue, even without words. Hearts speak to hearts, consciousness touches consciousness, and understanding passes between them more completely than any lecture could achieve. Professor Tanaka began to notice this phenomenon in his daily interactions. When he returned to the village where he was staying, he found that his conversations with the innkeeper, the local farmers, and even children playing in the streets had taken on a different quality. Instead of always filling quiet moments with words, he learned to let silence breathe between sentences. Instead of immediately responding to what people said, he would pause and truly listen, creating space for deeper truth to emerge. The results were remarkable. People began sharing things with him they had never told anyone. Their real struggles, their authentic hopes, their deepest questions about life. Children who had been shy around the intimidating professor now approached him freely, drawn by the quality of peaceful attention he radiated. Even animals seemed more at ease in his presence, as if they sensed that here was a human who had learned the ancient art of simply being present without agenda. One evening, as Professor Tanaka prepared to return to his university, he asked Master Dogen for final guidance about how to integrate this teaching into his academic life. "Master," he said, "I'm afraid I'll lose this understanding when I return to a world of lectures and debates and constant intellectual activity. How can I maintain this quality of presence in an environment that rewards rapid thinking and clever speech?" Master Dogen was quiet for a long moment, gazing out at the evening stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Finally, he spoke with the gentle authority of someone who had found a way to remain centered, regardless of external circumstances. "Professor," he said, "the silence we have shared is not dependent on external quiet. It is the silence of the clear sky that remains unchanged, whether clouds pass through it or not. In your lectures, you can speak from this silence, letting words arise from stillness rather than from mental agitation. In your debates, you can listen from this silence, hearing not just the concepts being discussed, but the human being behind the concepts. And in your daily life, you can move from this silence, carrying the peace you have discovered into every interaction. The secret," Master Dogen continued, "is to remember that silence is not something you do. It is something you are. Beneath all your thoughts, underneath all your words, this aware stillness is always present. Sometimes you need to become very quiet externally to remember it. But once you know it's there, you can access it even in the middle of the busiest, noisiest situations." This teaching points to what Zen masters call dynamic stillness, the ability to remain centered and present even while engaged in activity. It suggests that true spiritual practice is not about escaping the world, but about bringing the peace discovered in meditation into every aspect of daily life. Professor Tanaka left the temple transformed in ways that his colleagues would notice, but never quite be able to explain. His lectures became less dense with information, but more rich with wisdom. His debates became less about winning points and more about exploring truth together. His presence in faculty meetings created a quality of space that allowed others to think more clearly and speak more honestly. Years later, Professor Tanaka would become known throughout the academic world for a teaching style that combined scholarly rigor with profound humanity. Students would say that being in his classes felt like being seen and heard at the deepest level. Colleagues would seek his counsel not because he always had answers, but because he had the rare gift of creating space for answers to emerge naturally. And whenever anyone asked about the source of this transformation, Professor Tanaka would smile and tell them about an afternoon he spent with a master who taught him the most important lesson of his life without saying a word. Sometimes, he would conclude, the most profound conversations happen in complete silence, because silence doesn't tell you what to think. It creates space for you to discover what you already know in your heart. As our final story comes to its gentle conclusion, let this teaching settle into your awareness, like snow falling on still water. In a world that never stops talking, your willingness to truly listen, to others and to yourself, becomes a rare and precious gift. What would change in your relationships if you created more space for silence between words? What wisdom might emerge if you learned to trust the pauses as much as the sentences? Take a moment now to breathe with these questions, because we're about to gather all three teachings together and discover how they can transform every conversation you have for the rest of your life. Now that we've journeyed together through these three sacred teachings, let's pause and gather their wisdom like precious stones found along a mountain path. Each story has shown us a different facet of what the ancient masters called Buddha speech. Communication that arises from peace, flows with compassion, and lands with the precise gentleness needed to heal rather than harm. From Wei Ming, the young monk who learned to speak his truth, we discovered that authenticity isn't just honesty, it's honesty wrapped in self-compassion. His journey showed us that the masks we wear to appear spiritual or wise actually separate us from the very wisdom we're seeking. When we stop trying to sound like we have it all figured out and start speaking from our actual experience, including our confusion and struggles, something miraculous happens. We become real, and our realness gives others permission to be real too. Emperor Camus taught us that true strength doesn't come from dominating conversations or forcing our will upon others. Like bamboo bending in the storm, the most powerful communication is often the most flexible. When we speak from inner stillness rather than reactive emotion, when we listen to understand rather than to prove our point, we discover a form of influence that is far more effective than force, because it inspires willing cooperation rather than fearful compliance. And Master Dogen revealed perhaps the most profound teaching of all, that sometimes the most healing thing we can offer isn't words at all, but the gift of truly present listening. In a world drowning in noise, our willingness to create sacred space for silence becomes a form of love that allows others to hear their own wisdom, their own truth, their own heart speaking. But how do we actually live these teachings? How do we transform ancient monastery wisdom into practical guidance for our daily conversations? Let me share with you 3 simple practices that can revolutionize how you communicate, starting tomorrow morning. The first practice comes from Wei Ming's discovery, and it's beautifully simple. Before you speak in any important conversation, pause and ask yourself one question. Am I about to speak from my truth or from my image? Notice the difference between words that arise from authentic experience and words designed to make you look good, sound smart, or avoid discomfort. Then choose truth, but speak it with the same gentleness you'd use to tend a garden. This doesn't mean sharing every passing thought, but it does mean being honest about what you actually think, feel, and experience, rather than performing a version of yourself that isn't real. The second practice draws from Emperor Camus' transformation. When you find yourself in a disagreement or difficult conversation, remember the bamboo in the storm. Instead of immediately defending your position or trying to win the argument, try this. Take a breath and ask, what is this person really trying to tell me underneath their words? Listen not just to their position, but to the human need or concern driving that position. Often, when people feel truly heard at this deeper level, the entire dynamic of the conversation shifts from conflict to collaboration. The third practice embodies Master Dogen's teaching about the power of presence. Several times each day, especially during conversations that matter to you, experiment with creating what I call conscious pauses. These are moments of intentional silence, not awkward gaps, but spacious breaths that allow whatever has been said to settle before the next words arise. You'll be amazed how often these pauses allow deeper truth to emerge, both in yourself and in others. Silence isn't empty space to be filled. It's fertile ground where wisdom grows. But perhaps the most important integration of all these teachings is this. Begin with yourself. Notice how you talk to yourself inside your own mind. Are you gentle with your own struggles, patient with your own learning process, honest about your own experience? The way you speak to yourself becomes the foundation for how you speak to everyone else. If you're harsh and critical with your own inner voice, that harshness will leak into your external conversations, no matter how hard you try to be kind. Start each morning by asking yourself, how am I feeling right now, really? And then listen to your answer with the same compassionate attention you'd give to a dear friend. This simple practice of internal honesty and self-compassion becomes the wellspring from which all authentic, healing communication flows. Remember, these aren't techniques to master, but invitations to explore. You won't get them perfect, and that's not the point. The point is to begin, to experiment, to notice what happens when you speak from peace instead of reactivity, from presence instead of performance. Each conversation becomes a chance to practice, each interaction an opportunity to plant seeds of understanding rather than discord. The Buddha taught that our words create our world, and tonight you've learned how to make that creation conscious, intentional, and deeply loving. Tomorrow, and every day after, you have the power to transform not just your own experience, but the experience of everyone whose life you touch, through the simple, profound practice of speaking with a heart of peace. And so, dear friend, our journey together through these ancient teachings draws to its gentle close. You've walked with Wei Ming as he discovered the courage to be authentically human rather than perfectly spiritual. You've sat beside Emperor Camus as he learned that true strength flows from stillness, not force. And you've experienced the profound silence that Master Dogen shared, where wisdom speaks without words. As you prepare to rest now, whether sleep comes easily or you simply lie in peaceful contemplation, carry with you this simple truth. Every word you speak for the rest of your life is an opportunity to plant seeds of peace in a world that desperately needs more gentleness. You don't need to be perfect at this. You just need to be willing to begin again, one conversation at a time. Let your breathing slow now, natural and easy. Feel your body settling into this moment of rest. And as you drift towards sleep or deeper stillness, may these final blessings accompany you into the peace that has always been your true home. May your words arise from the same stillness that moves the stars across the sky. May your listening be so deep that others feel heard at the level of their soul. May your silence be not empty but full, pregnant with the kind of presence that heals without trying to fix. May you speak your truth with the tenderness of someone who understands that honesty is love made audible. May you bend like bamboo in the storms of life, remaining unbroken because you know when to yield and when to stand firm. And may you remember always that in a world of endless noise, your peaceful presence is a gift beyond measure. Tomorrow will bring new conversations, new opportunities to practice these ancient teachings in your modern life. But for now, simply rest in the knowing that you are enough, exactly as you are. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And your willingness to speak from love rather than fear makes the whole world a little more peaceful. Thank you for sharing this hour with us here at Echoes of Dharma. If these teachings have touched something true in your heart, we invite you to share them with others who might need this gentle reminder of their own inherent wisdom. Subscribe to join our growing community of seekers, and know that whenever you need to remember the power of peaceful speech, we'll be here, holding space for your journey back to your own Buddha nature. Until we meet again in the silence between words, may you rest well, dream gently, and wake tomorrow with a heart ready to speak peace into being. Sweet dreams, dear friend.